Recording has been started. Okay.
Welcome our viewers on this Saturday morning at 10 a.m. in United States and 7:30 p.m. in India. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I'm the president of the Council for Strategic Affairs. And this is our monthly distinguished lecture series, part of that. I'm going to share my screen so you can have an access to my screen. So the topic for today's distinguished lecture is Foreign Policy Options for India and Challenges in Afghanistan. It is part of our distinguished lecture series. Every third Saturday of the month, we have a distinguished lecture. As advertised, our distinguished speaker is Ambassador Kamal Sybil. This is Ambassador Kamal Sybil. He was India's Foreign Secretary from July 2002 to November of 2003. He has a postgraduate degree from St. Stephen's College in New Delhi. He has been India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, and France. Ambassador Sybil graduated from World Information Distributed University with scientific degree of International Doctor of Philosophy and the scientific degree of Grand Doctor of Philosophy in June 2006. Dr. Kamal Sybil is the first Grand Doctor of Philosophy in India to receive the title of full professor from the European Academy of Informatization and World Information Distributed University, WIDU. He has been widely invited for lectures, seminars, and symposia worldwide by various think tanks. He is also associated with Vivekananda International Foundation. At one point in time, he was the Dean for Diplomacy and Foreign Policy for Vivekananda International Foundation. He has been writing very actively in the press. His latest article was on AUKUS. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. Council for Strategic Affairs imparts education in the field of international relations. Council for Strategic Affairs fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. Council for Strategic Affairs encourages strategic studies in general to raise awareness. Council for Strategic Affairs aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. And last but not the least, Council for Strategic Affairs condemns terrorism in all forms worldwide. What are our activities? We have a monthly roundtable discussion. Usually it is done on second Monday of each month at 8 p.m. There's a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert, which is supposedly today. Council for Strategic Affairs organizes symposia, meetings, and conferences on strategic issues, and it promotes publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. So before we start the session, there are some housekeeping rules. We would like you to keep yourself on the mute to avoid noise interference. We would like to change your cell phone setting to vibration mode so that you don't have unexpected calls and that interferes with the sessions. When a speaker is speaking, please don't try to interrupt our speaker. Only members of the audience who identify themselves have the privilege to ask the questions. People who are joining anonymously are not willing to put their video recording on, video picture on. We do not encourage them to ask the questions. All your questions should be sent through the chat function or through Q&A function. We would like you to be very precise in asking questions. We would not like you to send detailed comments in the form of a monologue or a semi-lecture. And just for sake of information, we record each and every session, and within 24 hours of each session, the recording is available on our YouTube channel. So as I had said that our discussion for today was a lecture by Ambassador Kamal Sybil. We have a sort of glitch in our program. There is some difficulty accessing Ambassador Sybil at this point in time. So we will have to modify the format, and instead of this being a distinguished lecture, we will convert this into a roundtable discussion. And that would be much more meaningful rather than canceling our session. We are sorry that Ambassador Sybil could not join for whatever his situation is at this point in time. I also realize that there are a number of competing things happening with the Prime Minister of India giving a lecture in the United Nations General Assembly in New York. And I'm not sure what's the reason Ambassador Sybil is not able to join. We are not able to access him, whatever means we have tried. So our topic was foreign policy challenges for India and the Afghanistan issue. Afghanistan has been called a graveyard of empires. Very rightly, because British Empire fought 3 wars. There were 3 Anglo-African wars, and eventually, after a settlement, British decided to not, have further conflict with Afghans. And in 1893, the Durand Line was demarcated. In fact, the Afghan territory was bifurcated. Anything south of Durand Line was considered to be the British Empire, and a large chunk of Afghanistan's territory was incorporated in the British India. That included, cities like Peshawar, Dera Ismail Khan, and some other territories. That Durand Line was supposed to be in operation only for 100 years. So it was demarcated between Afghanistan and British India in 1893. In 1993, the existence of Durand Line was supposed to be sort of, given up. However, the successor states, Pakistan on south of Durand Line and Afghanistan have a conflict. Afghanistan's government, successive governments have asked Pakistan to honor the Durand Line. All of us know the, overthrow of monarchy. King Zahir Shah was overthrown by his prime minister and brother-in-law, Muhammad Dawood Khan, in around 1975. And following the coup, the monarchy was abolished. Muhammad Dawood Khan became president of the republic. Now, when this republic was formed, after a few years, there were some political activities. The Afghan Communist Party became very active, the Parcham faction and other factions. And there was a communist coup against Muhammad Dawood Khan. There were successive Afghan rulers belonging to the Communist Party, including Nur Muhammad Taraki, Babra Kamal, and finally Najibullah. In 1979, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and tanks rolled under Brezhnev. After Soviet Union moved into Afghanistan, the United States, in conjunction with Pakistan and in Western other Western powers, NATO allies, started a kind of resistance movement led by Islamic freedom fighters or so-called mujahideen. For a period of 10 years, the United States government, in conjunction with other Western powers and NATO alliances, supported mujahideen under successive US presidents, starting from Jimmy Carter, going on to Ronald Reagan, followed by George H.W. Bush. And finally, after 10 years of bleeding their resources, the Soviet Union decided to leave Afghanistan, and Soviets supported President Muhammad Najibullah was left in power. Muhammad Najibullah lasted in power for 2 more years after Soviet Union vacated Afghanistan. So Soviet Union was basically a lost power in Afghanistan. Najibullah finally was, toppled by the Islamic Mujahideen, and a coalition of Afghan tribes supported by Pakistan, supported by US, had Islamic government. It was called Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Those governments lasted from the overthrow of Najibullah and sort of takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban in 1996. So that period is from around 1992 to 1996, when Burhanuddin Rabbani's government, with him as president, and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar as the prime minister, had some role. But Pakistan had started their policy of strategic depth, and they were not satisfied with an independent Islamic government in Afghanistan. So they propped up Taliban as their agent, and Taliban were in power from 1996 to 2001. All of us know what happened from 2001 to 2021, when the US supported Afghan government, Islamic Republic of Afghanistan government was toppled following the hasty departure of United States. So we have now United States, which is not interested in Afghanistan. We have a murderous regime, a fundamentalist regime in Afghanistan, which is on the western border of India. And this murderous, terror-supporting regime is being supported by Pakistan. So it poses a lot of challenges, security challenges for India, strategic challenges for India, not only in near term, but also in long term. Mind you, from 1996 to 2001, India did not have diplomatic relationships with Taliban supported government in Afghanistan. This Taliban supported government was involved in ongoing terror activities worldwide, including 9/11 attacks on United States, because they had hosted Al-Qaeda. India also had some brushes with Taliban supported government led by Mullah Omar, because in 1999, an Indian airline plane was hijacked from Kathmandu to, flight to Delhi. It was hijacked in between, and then it went through a series of, maneuvers, was in Amritsar airport, then went to Middle East, and then was finally landed in Kandahar. And India was forced to, release some terrorists which were brought to Kandahar So India knows what Taliban are capable of. So we are facing a foreign policy challenge. What are our options? In fact, if you look at Indian media, in the beginning, when Taliban government came, everyone said that these are reform Taliban. This is Taliban 2.0. They have given undertakings that they will support, an inclusive government. They will not support terror activities from the soil of Afghanistan against any third country. They will not have animosity against any country. They will respect the human rights of women and children. They made all kinds of right noises, and they were able to do press conferences in English language. And I think that charmed a particular segment of India's establishment, especially India's English speaking establishment or, elite media. And I think a lot of pressure was put on India's government through, press that maybe India should open a dialogue with Taliban 2.0. Now, 1 month has passed, or more than 1 month has passed. Actually, it is pretty much 40 days plus that have passed since this government has come in power. They are in control, but they are really not governing. They are not in governance. They are in physical control of the territory. There are skirmishes going on in Panjshir Valley, although they claim that they had controlled the Panjshir Valley, but there is still some skirmishes going on. Ahmad Masood Jr. and Amrullah Khan were able to leave Panjshir Valley and are probably at this point in time in Tajikistan, from where they are leading the National Afghan Resistance Movement. So this is the situation in Afghanistan at this point in time. And challenges before India is, what should India do? Should India recognize Afghanistan led by Taliban 2.0, or keeping a hands-off approach with no communication? Or should India engage with this government without recognizing the government? That is the challenge in front of Indian government. Indian government gave the response that maybe we don't want to hurry through things. We will do a wait and watch policy. And I think that was a very, very legitimate viewpoint, that let's see, proof of the pudding lies in eating. Let's see what Taliban do, whether we should recognize them, whether should we deal with them, whether should we, interact with them, will depend ultimately on what they are doing on the ground. So their own actions will determine India's response as far as, future recognition of this government is concerned. Another complicating factor is, when Abdul Ghani fled Afghanistan and Taliban took over, all the prisons were, broken and prisoners escaped. So there were a lot of terrorists, foreign terrorists, that escaped from those prisons. And in fact, as part of Doha Accord, Abdul Ghani government was forced to release 5,000 Taliban fighters from the prison. And this was supported by the United States government. As we learn from the past, in the past, from 1996 to 2001, when the fighting against the Soviets had stopped, some of these fighters were infiltrated across the line of control into India's state of Jammu and Kashmir by Pakistan. And if history is going to repeat itself, already attempts are being made to infiltrate some of these spare or free or mercenary fighters to infiltrate against the line of control from Pakistan, POK and POL into India. And there has been increase in terror activities in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So we are facing a challenge and we have to determine what we wish to do. I wrote an op-ed piece called Taliban, Pakistan's Strategic Depth in Afghanistan and Way Forward. In that publication, I had suggested a 12-point program, and I'm going to repeat those 12 points. They were not meant actually for India, but for international community. And this op-ed piece was written on August 16th, one day after Taliban took control of the Islamic State of Afghanistan's territory. And I had suggested this 12-point action plan for the United Nations and international community as way forward to deal with the situation. So let's recapitulate what these 12 points were. The first point was that United Nations Security Council must invoke the Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter and authorize both military and non-military actions in the entire Af-Pak region, not just in Afghanistan. United Nations must not give recognition to Taliban 2.0 controlled regime in Afghanistan because of terror issues. The United Nations Security Council should declare Afghanistan FATA region. FATA is federally administered tribal area of Pakistan, and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Islamic Republic of Pakistan as UN protectorates. United Nations under its charter does have the obligation and does have the authority to declare a territory that is ungoverned as United Nations protectorate if it is, leading to instability and all. So that was the idea. The FATA and the KP province of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan have to be secured to prevent free flow of terrorist movement from one sanctuary across the border to the other side. Because in the past, the terrorists have had a free flow across the border, and that has led to a difficult situation. When India released the terrorists in 1999 in exchange for the passengers in the civilian airliner, Air India airliner, all those terrorists immediately crossed the border and went into Pakistan and again started plotting terror activities. So that was the experience. The next point was that the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and Asian Development Bank should not give low interest loans to Taliban-controlled regime in Afghanistan. Financial sanctions must be very hard from the beginning, as Taliban spokesperson have already started talking about extending Sharia law all over the world. So sanctions must stay in place. The next point was that the member states that are member of China-controlled international financial institutions, and there are two of those institutions. One of them is called Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, and India is a party to it. India actually contributed as a founding member of AIIB, but AIIB is under control of China. And the second is the BRICS Bank, or so-called NDB, New Development Bank of BRICS, which is headquartered in Shanghai. That both these China-controlled institutions, the other member nations, must invoke a veto power to any loans or credits or soft developmental aid to Taliban-controlled regime. Point number 8 was Taliban's violation of human rights, women's rights, and illegal narcotic trade calls for their criminal trials for crimes against humanity through the International Criminal Court in The Hague For sake of humanity, the Taliban terrorists must not be given a free pass. A process akin to Nuremberg trials must be started to bring Taliban to justice for the crimes committed against humanity from year 1996 to year 2001. Strict financial sanctions also must be imposed on the Islamic Republic of Pakistan for its complicity, and it should be put on the black list of FATF rather than the gray list. FATF stands for Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering. So Pakistan should be downgraded from the gray list to blacklist so that Pakistan stops supporting Taliban-controlled regime in Afghanistan. The final step suggested was that there should be deployment of UN peacemaking forces, not peacekeeping forces, in the territory of Afghanistan since US has left, and this UN peacemaking force must be given mandate to maintain law and order and should have proper mandate to fire on the Taliban fighters and defend Taliban's terror support network and control and neutralize the non-state actors. The point number 11 was that UN mandate must involve demilitarization of the AFPAC region, the terrorist networks, confiscation and destruction of all the $86 billion worth of armament that United States has left there. No terror supporting organization should get access to it and it should be destroyed. And lastly, the United Nations must take adequate steps so that Pakistan's nuclear weapons are out of reach of Taliban 2.0, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadi terror groups. It is very, very important because in 1996 to 2001, two scientists of Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission had traveled to Kandahar, and they had actually had meetings with Al-Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden, about transfer of nuclear technology to Al-Qaeda and Taliban. It has happened once. It may happen again if Taliban actually gain ground and consolidate their position in Afghanistan. So this was a 12-point action plan proposed to United Nations and international community. And of course, we know that this is not going to happen. United States and NATO alliance have, washed their hands of Afghanistan and left it for the region. So it poses a great problem for India as to, what India does at this point in time, what are foreign policy challenges. I think the expectation that Indian government will recognize the Taliban controlled government is too much of a wishful thinking. Indian government is not going to recognize Taliban. And I think nobody has recognized Taliban government so far, including Pakistan. Although Pakistan is making a lot of noises, Imran Khan Niazi, in his address to United Nations General Assembly, did make this noise that the world should incentivize the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan government because they have made all the right promises. But India is not going to do that. India should not do that. India cannot recognize actually Taliban-supported government in Afghanistan. So that is definitely there. Should we be talking to Taliban? Probably yes. We have our strategic interests. Sometimes you have to talk to your enemy. You have to talk to the devil to find out what devil wants. Doesn't mean that you agree with whatever the devil says. So possibly some sort of back channel communications or low level at MEA communications at officer level will probably continue and probably are already happening. But does that mean India will recognize Afghanistan? The answer is a big no. What should be our long-term strategy? Should India support National Resistance Force of Afghanistan? Question would be, why not? I think they are much more moderate. Amrullah Saleh has already declared himself as interim president of Afghanistan under the constitution of Afghanistan that was promulgated, and the government of Abdul Ghani was elected government for whatever its reason. I think it is in strategic interest of India continue to have links with the so-called Northern Alliance, which is no longer called Northern Alliance. Even in the past, it was called United Front for Resistance. So Ahmad Massoud Jr. and the forces of resistance in Panjshir Valley, I think India needs to continue to support those resistance fighters. Question has been asked in the past. India was requested by United States government to, deploy the troops in Afghanistan. That is a challenge. India refused in the past, and probably India should not get into the temptation of, sending boots to the ground. A lot can be done strategically without sending boots to the ground. We don't have a land border at this point in time because of adverse occupation of Indian Union territory of Pakistan occupied Ladakh. The territory which borders on to Panjshir Valley and northern areas of Afghanistan actually is in India's Union territory of Pakistan occupied Ladakh, the whole, the northern areas of Gilgit and Baltistan. And in fact, if we can get access to our own territory, we would have a land bridge to Central Asia. And at some point in time, India will have to liberate those territories from adverse occupation by occupying enemy. So in that process, if you have some allies who are willing to work with you and assist with you, there is no reason why India should not help the Northern Resistance Force that is active in Panjshir Valley and northern areas of Afghanistan. So that would be my take that yes, India can continue to work in the area, not have hands-off approach, not deploy any human resources directly on the territory, but continue to support the resistance fighters in the northern areas of Afghanistan. India should not get into the temptation of recognition of Taliban government. India should be very wary of Pakistan's attempt to integrate the area of Afghanistan as part of larger Af-Pak region. This was the doctrine of strategic depth enunciated by Muhammad Ziaul Haq, the former Pakistani dictator who wanted to give Pakistan strategic depth by having a federation of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And Pakistan is trying to do that since then. So we are on crossroads. And since we didn't have our distinguished speaker, we will open to questions at this point in time. I know that we do not have very large audience today, and I think that is because of the Prime Minister's visit to United States and the speech at this point in time in United Nations General Assembly. But let's have some discussion in the remaining portion. So I don't see in chat function anyone raising a question. And since we are a small, audience, maybe we can just, have some live questions. Any questions, please? So it looks like nobody has any questions.
Oh no, I was unmuting here.
Okay.
This is Vijay Nilekani speaking. You know, when the United States was in its early formation, uh, there was a President Monroe, James Monroe, going back 150 years, and he had something called the Monroe Doctrine, which was that nobody should mess with the neighborhood of the United States, even if they're outside countries. They can't use the word sovereign. And basically, it was a warning to Britain, France, Spain, Germany, and other countries not to tamper with America's neighborhood. And this was long before America became a superpower. And I personally feel that India should have a similar doctrine. It has been a very passive country for 70 years. And we have to have a very explicit doctrine that we will not tolerate interference in our neighborhood. And that's not just the territorial border of India. I think this non-alignment policy has really done a lot of damage to India. India should have had something like a Monroe Doctrine, where whether it's Sri Lanka or Maldives or Nepal or Pakistan or Bangladesh or whoever, that India will not tolerate interference in our region. And I don't think we ever had any such explicit policy. It was always we're non-aligned, every country is independent, they can do whatever they like type of a laissez-faire approach, which I think is coming back to haunt India in many ways, you know. And this includes Bangladesh and even sometimes when there have been hostile regimes in Maldives and stuff like that.
Thank you very much, indeed, Vijay. I am glad that you invoked the Monroe Doctrine. I would actually bring it to the notice of our audience that I wrote a detailed paper in 2005, which was published on a website called South Asia Analysis Group in an abridged form. And it was, United States, India-US relationship challenges for the future administration. And then the detailed article was published titled, quote unquote, Engaging India on a website called bology.com in 2008. And in that article, and I will send anyone who is interested a copy of that article, I had talked about a doctrine that I had enunciated. So India did not have an analogous to Monroe Doctrine, but I had called it Adityan Doctrine, that India is going to manage its near abroad or its neighborhood. And India would not kowtow to any of the superpowers, whether that is United States or whether that is China. India has its own sphere of influence, and India shall manage that sphere of influence. And that doctrine was propounded not in relation to the Monroe Doctrine, but in relation to now infamous Gujarat Doctrine that you might be aware of. So, although the government of India has taken a wishy-washy approach, but some strategic thinkers, and in this case myself, did enunciate a doctrine that is analogous to Monroe Doctrine. And it explicitly says that we care for our own strategic interest in our backyard or our sphere of influence, and we shall not countenance any interference in our strategic sphere of influence. And I will actually share those links later on, probably in our Google group, so people can read that in detail. But I'm very thankful to Vijay for bringing that issue. In the history of nations, there is a cycle of power. Westphalian nations, they rise, they, achieve, superpower status, and then empires crumble. That has been, the history is never static. So India is on upward trajectory, and India, although does not have a national security doctrine or national security strategy, which is published, but I think India is working towards hardening its defense posture, and we are seeing the results. But for political reasons, I'm pretty sure Indian government is not going to talk about, these issues, as we are a very noisy and fractious democracy, and any national security strategy doctrine will be torn to pieces by the political adversaries of the government in power. So from a prudence point of view, Indian government probably will not, at least in next 5 years, bring out a national security doctrine, but there are analogous doctrines there. I'm looking at the chat function. Again, there are no questions. There is a comment from Dr. Kulshrestha about compliments. Dr. Kulshrestha, you want to say anything? Please go ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself, Dr. Kulshrestha.
Sir, no comments. My compliments, as I said, not my field, as you know. I work on weapon systems. I really wanted to hear you and also Dr. Sybil, if he was present. But I think you have done a magnificent job of enlightening me on the Afghanistan right from the initial stages today. My compliments once again. It was a pleasure to join you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Kulshrestha, and maybe in some of the forum we will use your expertise, because people are probably not very aware of your credentials, but I am sure that soon we will have, featuring in one of our either panel discussions or distinguished lecture series. Thanks for your compliment. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Any more questions or comments from our audience?
I had one more question, Dr. Adityanji.
Yes.
There is a good chance that Pakistan will mismanage its relationships with Afghanistan, and Afghanistan could become a destabilizing Frankenstein for Pakistan itself. Especially, there's a nationalism in the Pashtuns, and they may want to take over, abolish the Durand Line and incorporate Western Pakistan and into Eastern Afghanistan. And plus, the radicalism might destabilize the half-baked democracy or the quarter-baked democracy in Pakistan, which has never been a real democracy anyway, but it could very well consume Pakistan, both in terms of radicalizing further and Afghanistan claiming to incorporate the tribal areas into Afghanistan. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So my personal opinion is that India should support a two-state solution, not in Palestine. India should support a two-state solution in the territory of Afghanistan, and I'll tell you why. Afghanistan has never been a unified country. It is a conglomeration of tribal fiefdoms. Even under King Zahir Shah, and he was a monarch for 40 years, the government's writ, by and large, was in Kabul. The tribal fiefdoms, the tribal territories were kind of semi-autonomous. So that was the situation. And I think what we are expecting now is to be a unified Afghanistan. And of course, there is a plurality. There are ethnic minorities. So these ethnic minorities are Hazaras, there are Tajiks, there are, Uzbeks, there are Shias, there are Turkmen, and pretty much all these, the minorities, ethnic minorities that are left are Islamic in nature. Historically, Afghanistan was, to begin with, a Hindu empire, became Buddhist, till it was overrun by Islamic invaders. What we have seen in the last 70 years, ethnic cleansing of non-Islamic minorities. So we have seen extermination of Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and Christians.
And Shias too.
Well, Shias are still there, large number.
But they've murdered a lot of Hazara people, you know.
Yeah, 9% of Afghan population at this point in time is Shia. There was a time there were 18% Shias. So there is no way the Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Turkmen, they will accept Pashtun sovereignty or suzerainty over their areas. And even in last 20 years, the Panjshir Valley, Panjshir actually stands for 5 lions. I think Indian media channels wrongly pronounce as Panjshir. It's not Panjshir, it's Panjshir, 5 lions. That territory is very difficult to control. And despite Taliban's claims that they are controlling it, they're being trapped inside that. So probably we will see a de facto partitioning of Afghanistan with northern areas, having a semi-autonomous mini state, just like you have in Iraq, a northern Kurdish mini state, which is still not recognized internationally, but it exists. It exists de facto. It would be a mini state just like Somaliland in Somalia. So there will be de facto partitioning after the fighting is over. I don't think the northern areas, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Shia population will succumb to the pressures of Taliban. So what will it lead to? A de facto partition with a, hump of southern Afghanistan and northern Pakistan. Durand line is questionable because its existence was supposedly de facto and de jure only for 100 years, from 1893 to 1993. Even the Taliban do not actually acknowledge the Durand line. So we are going to have on our western border a lot of instability, lot of fluidity, strategic fluidity, and you have some transitional states there. Pakistan in itself is a transitional state. We don't know what would be the outcome. Let's say if Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, FATA, and the southern rump of Afghanistan become one big Pashtunistan at war with Pakistan as an entity survive, where there will be emergence of Sindhu Desh and independent Balochistan. So we are, seeing a strategic conundrum west of the current borders of India, and future is going to be unpredictable. But my personal prediction would be that there will be a two-state solution for Afghanistan. The way it's constituted, it is untenable because of the hostilities, animosities, and lack of kinship. So you will probably have a northern area which is independent, whatever it will be called, the Islamic Republic of Northern Afghanistan, or, some other name is a different issue. But probably the southern part of the Pashtun part of Afghanistan and the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and FATA areas of Pakistan may become a one unified state. So Pakistan's existence has always been in question and is still in question. It has partitioned once. It will not stay as an independent state. Any more questions before we call it a day?
So India should actively encourage actually the breakup of Pakistan, because I've talked to many American Balochis and American Sindhi, Muslim Sindhis from Pakistan. They hate Pakistan. They want nothing to do with Pakistan. They have even burned their passports. So I feel that India should actively encourage these they're not really minority, they're very substantial populations, especially the Sindhis. And definitely the Sindhu Desh and the Balochians, India should not be passive in that area, because they have to do what they did with Bangladesh sooner or later. And I'm not saying military intervention, but actively support them.
So point is well taken, but there's an adage that in order to tell to the world that you are a meat eater, you don't actually hang bones on your neck. You know, so a lot of things are done covertly, a lot of actions are done covertly. And in this case, there's no need to make any jingoistic proclamations on part of at least the government as an entity, because government has to deal with state-to-state relationships and international institution. Any action that needs to be done covertly needs to be done covertly and should not be publicized.
That I agree.
Okay, so again, my sincere apologies to our audience that our distinguished speaker was not able to join us. So we had to have an impromptu roundtable discussion on the topic of foreign policy challenges or options for India in view of the strategic situation in Afghanistan. I thank all of you who took time from your, Saturday morning. You could be doing, weather is nice, you could be doing other things, but you did take time off, so we had a fruitful discussion. We will continue to have our, this distinguished speaker series, and hopefully in month of October, we will have a distinguished speaker that will, be there for you to listen to. My sincere apologies and heartfelt thanks that you people participated in this roundtable discussion on Afghanistan. Without further ado, I'm going to close this meeting and close this discussion. Thanks a lot to everyone who joined.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.